Oh, Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. So this revolves into another parts store where I eventually became, this is before I started at the college. Um, I became a commercial parts guy for a little while at a new chain auto parts store, which eventually was bought up by somebody else too. I don't remember what happened, but they kind of let me have free reign. And at the time, well, before this, there was a I'm not big into like, you know, additives and stuff like that, snake oils and things like that. But I've seen some that work. Like Slick 50 works, but it builds up. I think I've seen it like flake off, and I've seen it do some stuff and plug stuff up. It works good, but it's not like a multiple application thing like a lot of them try and get you to do with every oil change, like the engine restore and stuff like that. That actually does fill up some stuff, but let's face it, if you're using that snake oil, you probably should just do the right thing and, tear the thing down and rebuild it, or have it rebuilt or replace it. But these guys that, I think it was two brothers in Idaho, they were trying to invent an octane booster for the FAA to work on airplanes, gas, like 100 low lead, Cessnas, whatever, 130. There's an octane booster when they got high altitude, would keep these gas engines from pinging and would work in, all atmospheres. And they did it. They successfully invented a octane booster that would do that. The only problem was the byproduct of it burning in gasoline was a super caustic acid that would literally eat the exhaust off an airplane or off of a vehicle, a truck. If you ran in your gas tank, like Lucas, a brand new truck, a brand new exhaust system would be gone in 6 months. It would eat it from the inside out. I mean, totally gone, like giant holes in the pipes, just gone, as if you just stuffed it in, a vat of acid and salt and just let it eat it apart. And so they didn't get the approval to run that. But what was unique about it was if you put in oil, it would condition the metal to like basically change the molecular structure of the surface of it. And it would become like no friction. It's weird, like really weird. And I didn't really believe in it. I'd heard about it and I had never tried it out. And it's called energy release. Now, it's still made now, but I think it's owned by an offshore company that has it now, and the formula is different. I don't know if it still works. It used to be super thick like honey. Now I don't think it's quite that thick, and I don't know if it's the same, but I think it essentially was chlorinated paraffin. And I heard rumor that it was something similar to what Toyota used to stick in their engines in the brake-in oil when they first were new. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I heard. That's why Toyota engines ran and lasted so long. But this stuff I know worked for a fact. I tried it in several applications. And being the auto parts industry and being a commercial guy, I knew lots of guys, engine builders and stuff like that. And I was interested in this stuff. And the guy came in and he was putting up the cardboard thing to put this energy release on the shelves and sell bottles and gallons and all this stuff. And it was brand new coming into our store. And it was kind of like they were making enough of it where stores were picking it up, but only locally. And I was like, as I asked the guy, I said, does this stuff really work? And he goes, yeah, it works. And I was like, yeah, that's what they all say. All these like, Ray Lube or, whatever these other things are, they all say this stuff works good, but does it work? And he said, yeah, let's try it. And I said, well, what do you mean? And about that time, this lady pulls in a Ford Bronco with a V8 and that wonderful kazoo sounding power steering pump. And he said, let's try it right now. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, let's try it on a power steering pump. And I was like, all right, I'm game. So she's right out front. The truck's still running and he grabs a bottle off the thing. And I go, no, let me grab the bottle. And I grabbed one off of some other thing on his shelf and handed it to him. And he goes out there and he says, ma'am, it kind of startles her. And she's like, yeah. And he said, I want to test out, I'm a representative for this chemical, and I want to test out this additive can I put in your power steering pump? And she's like, no. Are you crazy? What's wrong? Get away from me. And he said, no. He said, I'll buy. If anything happens to it, I'll pay to repair it, and I'll pay you for your time that you're down, and I'll pay for everything. I just want to try it. And she's like, she looks at me, and I'm wearing like the shirt for the store. And I was like, I'm here to see if it actually works. He says it would. It does. I'm interested. And she said, are you in on this? And I was like, yeah, I'll chip in the part. How about that? And he's like, okay. She says, yeah, sure. She says, what do you want to do? He goes, well, just start it up. So starts it up, and we listen to this kazoo, power steering pump. And he says, okay. So he takes it, puts a little bit in the cap, and dumps it in the power steering fluid reservoir. And before either of us knew what was going on, the thing shut up. Yeah, like quiet. And he says, how's it feel? And she steers it back and forth, lock to lock, and it sounds like a regular power steering pump. Quiet. She said, oh, it's really free. This thing is really nice. It's never felt this good. What is that stuff? And I'm looking at this bottle. I'm like, you just put a capful in, like maybe a half an ounce. He goes, yeah, that's all it needed for that volume. And I was like, okay. I said, can you be here tomorrow? And he said, what are you going to do? I said, bring your test equipment if you have one. He goes, I have one. I have a testing equipment. And I said, be here tomorrow, and I'm going to have an audience. I'm going to call some local like engine builders and mechanics and come down, because if this stuff, I just saw it do this, if it'll continue doing this, I'm going to like spread this out. People need to know about this. And so he was real excited. Okay, cool. So the next day he shows up. He shows up with a table. He's got this table, and he's got a vise, and he has like a homemade drill press, and it's like just a regular corded drill that you can lock the speed on. And it's like a 3/4 chuck or something. It's a pretty good drill. Well, it might have been like a quarter horse or whatever. But he's got it on a beam style torque wrench. And so in this vise and this table, and what he's got is he's got these 2x2 blocks with a 1/4 inch hole drilled in them. And he's got 1/4 inch metal dowels that he chucks up in the chuck, and he puts the dowel into this thing. And so he spins it in the drill and runs it into this piece of metal. And he said, okay, he said, go get whatever additive and oil you want to try. And I said, really? I said, I have a lot of them. He goes, let's do it. So I went and grabbed every additive and every single oil that we had, every manufacturer and every oil. And he's like, well, we're going to be here for a while. And I had a crowd there. And so he fires it up, just regular oil, Valvoline or whatever, puts it in there, no additive, pulls the thing down, and you could see the torque beam thing, and the drill stops. And like you can see it glowing and smoke and oil smoking, and it just stops and sees it. So he bangs it, and the drill comes back up, and he files the end of it down smooth again and puts another one in. He's got a bag of these things. Puts another one in. Everybody's looking at this going, oh, wow, that thing's sealed in there. Takes the block out, puts another block in, does the same thing, throws another oil in there. Goes through these things over and over and over again. Goes through every additive we had. And some lasted for a while, and some would, burn up, and you could see these things, like they would go real quick. Different oils went up really quick. And some, like, actually caught fire. They were getting hot, and the drill was doing good. And so he goes, all right, let's try yours. Let's try my product. And everybody's like, all right, we've seen Slick 50, we've seen all these things, we know none of this stuff really works. What about yours? And it changed, like each one of these dowels changed colors, and they did different things in the blocks, and we're passing it around. Everybody's looking at them, oh, this is what Slick 50 does, and with the Valvoline, or this is what it does with Pennzoil. And we're like looking at all these things, and we got this table going, and I think we brought in like lunch or something, had it catered. It was a pretty good time. And this guy puts a drop of oil in, puts some oil in this thing, puts like an eye drop of like 1 drop of this ER in, and fires up this drill and brings it down, and it glows and then stops. But it's like, 150 pounds. And the drill stops, and we're like, it doesn't work. And he lifts the drill back up, and it starts spinning again. Goes back down in there. And it spins, stops. Now the drill is smoking. Lifts it back up, and the drill still spins. Puts it back down. Burnt the drill up. didn't stick once. I think my battery just died on my thing, so I don't know how much of the story you're getting. Maybe it's a different, maybe you're getting something different. I think this died. Yep, my mic died. So hopefully you're able to hear the rest of the story this way. So anyway, it started blinking right about the time I said it was the dowel. It didn't have any marks on it at all. In fact, it was polished and shiny. And so everybody I know started using it in that area. They became like a household name for a while, and then it disappeared. We couldn't find it anymore. I don't know what happened. They must have got bought up by somebody else, and they took the rights to it, and it disappeared. And then it showed up again. I don't think it's quite as good, but everybody used to put it in, like they said, don't put an automatic transmission, but everybody put it in the power steering pumps, in the differential, in the wheel bearings, in the engine. And I ran it in the engine, in my blowers. I ran it in everything. Blown engines. In fact, I had in the coupe, the second motor I had in there, first motor, I got out of a wrecking yard. It was a 305, and it was junk. I mean, the thing was junk. It ran fine, but it had this terrible oil leak, and it was just running oil past the guides and past the rings. It was just wore out, and I started running ER in it. I dumped it in there. I don't know how many miles are on it, and I put another 100,000 on that motor. But it was so bad, this thing would literally smoke and smoke and smoke and burn it to where it'd be on a trip somewhere, and it would burn, and the oil pressure gauge would be like bouncing off a zero, and it'd be running so bad it would stop smoking, but the lifters would collapse. Like literally collapse. There'd be no oil. The thing would run like on 4 or 5 cylinders. I'd limp it into a gas station, and we'd fill it up with oil, put 4 or 5 quarts into it, fire it up, and it'd start filling them back up, but it would just fog mosquitoes. And it run fine. And I had got another motor from a buddy of mine, and I took it to my other buddy. It was a machine shop because I didn't have time to mess with it. And he took it, tore the motor down, and he's like, "What are you gonna do with this 305 or whatever?" And I said, "Oh, you can have it," because he had a buddy that had a boat. He wanted a new motor. I said, "You can have that thing." So we pulled it down, and he called me. He goes, "You got to come over here and look at this motor." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I've never seen anything like it." So I showed up over to the shop, and he pulls it down. He goes, "You ever seen a ridge like this in the cylinder?" And the cylinder had tapered 30 thousandths. 30 thousandths taper. Like worn out. But the crankshaft and the bearings and the cam and the lifters and the timing chain and all that stuff, he could have reused the bearings. The crank was still polished, and the lifters didn't have any wear on the bottom of them. Neither did the cam. I'm not joking. But the cylinder bore, it was wore out. Wore out. I think it just got to a point where, it was already so big and so tapered, and whatever was in it, but it stopped it from getting any worse. But I'd never seen a taper that big. 30,000. The motor was junk. He's like, "I'm not boring this thing out." He threw it away. But he's like, "I can't believe that motor ran as good as it ran." And it kept, when I put oil in it, it would be like 40 pounds of pressure. And I would run it with no oil. And I'm not joking. It didn't scar the crank. And if he actually watched these videos or knew that this stuff existed, he would comment. He might even have pictures. But I'm not joking. That stuff was amazing. I don't know if you can still get it. You might check online, ER, but it's definitely something. I'm going to see if my buddies in Idaho can find me some and send me some for this, because it's not something you want to put in a fresh motor, because the rings will never seat. If you run it, it'll take forever to seat. You want to make sure your motor's good and broke in, and then put it in there. Same with wheel bearings and things like that. You want them all seated and the differential seated, and then like the second oil change or whatever, after you get all the braking stuff done, then you put it in with whatever oil. But it's not a lubricant. It has zero lubrication properties. It impregnates and changes the molecular structure where there is no friction. It's nuts. Absolutely nuts. I don't know why. It's like the snake oil carburetors or whatever you hear about when I was growing up. Guys have a big block Chevelle, and he invented a carburetor, and he gets 60 miles a gallon, but he only made one, and he got sued by whoever some carburetor manufacturer, whatever, they just bury them in with patent infringements or whatever, and they never ever ever get to produce the carburetor. But it's like that. Those things actually work. I've seen some of those carburetors. They're pretty neat. Anyway, that's it. That's it for this story. If you can find this stuff, it's called energy release. It has a big E and an R, and it's like energy release. It's in a black container, and I mean, it just looks like a small bottle of additive. I think you put like 2 ounces per quart or an ounce per quart or something. I have some stories about that stuff with buddies at the racetrack. I have to tell you about those stories too later. But anyway, remind me about some ER stories. I'll tell you. Anyway, it's Sunday. You know what? I'm just going to tell you. Story number 2. This has to do with energy release. It's a 2 for Sunday. So this guy I knew was a Dodge guy. Had a Challenger. Ran pretty good. Ran real hot though. Temperature was really hot. The kind where you get done drag racing, you pull back towards a water thing, and you'd spray it down through the radiator, like they had a water hose, and you'd spray it down to cool it before you get back to it. It was in the pits. And he had this car, and it got really, really hot. Really hot. But he'd heard about this ER, and I think he's running a 400 block. It was a big block. I think it was a 400 he had stroked in this Challenger, and he's running 1160s or something. I forget. It was a real consistent car, but man, it would get hot, like really hot. And he tried it one day. We're sitting there at the track. Just got back from a run, his first run, and I had a bottle, I think, or he bought a bottle. He goes, "You know anything about that?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, try it out." And we're sitting there, things just chopping away, idling, and he's spraying it down with like the water stuff, and we're just talking, and he pours in the oil, and he's just doing his spraying thing down. He sprays it down, and then we just we're talking about something. He stops spraying, and all of a sudden, I look at him, and I'm like, looking at the car, and he looks at me, and like the idle's going up. Everything's just idling faster and faster. He looks in there, and he goes, "Man, the thing went up 300 RPMs." And so he turns the idle down, and back to like where it's supposed to be, somewhere around 1,000 or something like that. We're talking, and starts going up again. I was like, "You got a vacuum leak? Is there something going wrong with your carburetor?" He goes, "No, I don't know. All I did was put this stuff in there." And he reaches in there, and he's like looking through the window, and he looks up at me, and he goes, "Come over here." And I was like, "What?" I look at there, he goes, "Look at my temperature gauge." And I go, "Well, you're spraying it down with water." He goes, "I haven't been spraying it with water for a while." And the temperature gauge was dropping. Had dropped down to like, I remember, I think the car consistently ran like in the 200s at the end of the track. Like when he was done, I mean, it was hot. And I think this thing was like, I think he had a 160 in it. It was like sitting down at like 160. I was like, "That's crazy." And it was idling high. And I go, "It can't be that stuff." And he goes, "No, I think it is." That was the key about that energy release. It had to get hot. Once it gets hot, then it can make it has to get to a certain temperature where the two metals or the two get to a certain temperature, and then it does its thing. It does like its molecular transformation or whatever it was. I don't really understand it all, but that's what it did. And so we tried it in lots of cars that we knew ran hot and ran rough. Guy with like a hot 280Z with a small block that was running really hot, and we poured it in there, and the same thing happened. Idling high, changed it down, it brought the temperatures down because there's no friction really, no heat, and that seemed to be the biggest benefit that guys were having. And the car went faster, so they threw it in the rear end, of course, and in a manual tranny and all sorts of stuff. But I remember that car. That was the most dramatic change I saw, other than the power steering pump on that Ford when the kazoo went away, or my 305 or whatever in that coupe. But was in that Challenger. I mean, I sat there and the thing was hot, and it cooled down at idle in the track. This is a race motor. I mean, 1160s race motor. We're talking, what is that? 500 horsepower. Not major crazy, but in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, that was kind of a hot Chrysler. It ran pretty good, but yeah, it was amazing. And that 280, it happened with that 280Z. That small block ran cooler. All my vehicles ran cooler because of it. and just seemed to get better mileage. You know, I mean, who really pays attention when you got a hot rod anyway? But you know, anything you can do for it. But yeah, this video has been like 20 minutes. I'm playing with one of my brake line tools just because I've been doing it for the last couple of days so much that I'm just like, it's ingrained in my head. Brake lines. Anyway, hope you guys had a great weekend. Tomorrow is Monday, will be part 3 of the brake line saga. And then you have part 4 and part 5. I'm sorry. And then hood and hood cutting. I probably will wait till Wednesday night or whatever, or Tuesday night, to actually start chopping on this next week. Getting the hood chopped out. And then I may or may not bring the plasma cutter over from a buddy of mine. And I might chop the rear end out of this thing and actually put it on leaf springs and boxer frame. I might just do that here so I can actually do it and then run the exhaust. Because I don't really want to start this thing without pipes again. And I've got a full exhaust kit in that closet over there. That's what's going to happen. Anyway, see you kids later. Thanks for hanging out with me.